There's a certain kind of fear that doesn't come with screams or footsteps. It lives quietly. It waits. It follows you from room to room, settles behind your eyes, and shows up when you're brushing your teeth or trying to fall asleep. That's the kind I've lived with since that night, the night I saw her take him. I never spoke about it. Not to family, not to friends. I stopped answering calls months after it happened. I stopped watching the news when his name came up. I moved cities, changed jobs, but it stayed with me. And no matter what I did, I kept waking up at 17 a.m. with the taste of iron in my mouth and her voice ringing in my ears. I remember thinking that house looked too normal, like it was trying to be invisible. The trees were trimmed in perfect symmetry. The driveway was swept clean, and the lights were warm enough to feel lived in, but not too warm to seem suspicious. Every inch of it was calculated. You don't notice that at first. But when you look back, when you've seen what I've seen, it becomes obvious nothing in that house was designed by chance. They didn't call it a party, they called it a gathering. A closed circle retreat, by invitation only. No filming, no press, no staff movement past the second hour. Phones were taken at the gate. No one argued. No one even flinched. I was already working with them before that night. I had been in their orbit for months, quiet, observant, useful. I was the type they like. Skilled but invisible. I didn't ask questions. I got the job done and left. That's probably why they trusted me enough to be there at all, but not enough to know what I'd be walking into. I remember seeing him before anything else. He was sitting alone on a velvet chair by the far wall, one leg crossed over the other, head slightly tilted back, not asleep, but not present either. The music in the room had gone quiet, yet no one noticed. They were too busy pretending not to stare at her. All eyes were on her, even when they weren't. But he looked like something had already been taken from him. His fingers tapped a slow rhythm against his leg, the kind of movement people make when they're trying to hold themselves together. His jaw was clenched. His lips were moving, but nothing came out. And every few seconds, he blinked like it hurt. No one spoke to him, not even her. She just walked past him once, trailing the tip of her nail across the table beside his seat. She didn't look at him. She didn't have to. That's when I felt it. A pressure, not in the room, in me. Something thick, like air full of oil, pressing into my ribs. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed, but they were all calm, too calm. Their smiles didn't move. Their hands didn't fidget. It was like someone had pressed pause on a room full of mannequins dressed as people. I should have left. I know that now. I felt it in my spine, in the back of my throat, in that place behind the heart where you store things you can't unsee. But I didn't move. None of us did. And when she finally spoke, I felt the temperature shift, not around me, but inside me. Her words weren't loud. They weren't even strange. But every syllable felt like it had been carved from something older than language itself. Her voice didn't echo. It landed. And when it did, I saw his head tilt toward her, slowly, like a puppet remembering its string. Whatever she had come to do that night, it had already begun. People always think it starts with the ritual, with candles, with symbols, with the chanting. But it doesn't. It starts with routine, with control, with small things that don't feel like much on their own, until you realize you've been walking in circles and someone's been turning the floor beneath you. They had a system. Every guest was checked in silently, by face alone. No ID, no signatures, just a long glance from a man holding a tablet with no visible screen. He didn't ask anyone anything. Just looked into their eyes for a few seconds, nodded once, and moved on. Staff didn't speak unless spoken to. They moved like shadows, always 2 steps behind, but never fully seen. I was even handed a list of phrases I was allowed to say out loud. Yes. Mom, it's ready. Understood. That was it. No names, no small talk, only permission and compliance. The schedule was printed in numbers, no labels. Room 1, time 3, group 2. You didn't know what was coming next. You just followed the order. And that's how they liked it. By the second hour, Dave looked worse. He'd moved from the chair to a long cushioned bench near the hallway. He wasn't sitting anymore. He was folded forward, elbows on knees, hands locked tight together like he was praying with his teeth clenched. I passed close enough to hear him muttering under his breath. I leaned in slightly. I shouldn't have come. His voice was dry, like he'd been swallowing dust. He didn't look up when I passed, and he didn't need to. I could feel the heat coming off his skin like something inside him was burning itself out. That same hour, the rooms began to change. I hadn't noticed it at first, but one by one, the light in each space shifted. Not dimmed, warped. The colors bent in subtle ways. Whites looked yellow. Shadows became longer. Reflections stayed a half second too long after you moved. One of the women, someone famous, though I won't say her name, was crying quietly in the corner of the library, not loudly, not with tears running down her face. She just sat there, eyes red, staring into the spine of a book. She never turned. No one asked if she was okay. That's when it hit me. Even if we didn't know what we were part of, it didn't matter. We had already agreed the moment we stepped through the gate. When I returned to my assigned hall, one of the assistants handed me a folded slip of paper. It wasn't addressed, but I knew it was meant for me. I opened it. No message. Just a black circle drawn in a pen, perfectly centered. I didn't ask what it meant, I just kept walking. Because by then, the room didn't feel like a house anymore. It felt like a throat, tight, warm, closing around us, inch by inch. And somewhere between the fourth and fifth hour, I noticed something even worse. No one was checking the time, because none of the clocks were real. I kept telling myself it was exhaustion. That's what the mind does when it's afraid. It makes explanations. It grabs whatever seems close enough to pass as truth. Maybe he hadn't slept. Maybe he drank too much. Maybe the room was just too warm. But deep down, I knew it wasn't any of that. Something was happening to him, and none of us were stopping it. By hour 5, Dave no longer looked like a man trying to leave. He looked like a man who had already been taken. He wasn't blinking anymore, just staring ahead, eyes wide, unflinching. His breathing had changed too, shallow and steady, like someone counting down under their breath. But the worst part wasn't what he did. It was how everyone else responded. They smiled. They watched him with this strange peace, like they had all seen this before. No one panicked. No one whispered. It was as if what was happening to him was part of the experience. I stood across the room, half hidden behind a curtain near the projection bay, pretending to check the cables. But I couldn't stop watching him. He wasn't speaking anymore. His lips were moving, but there were no sounds. Just shapes, repeating again and again. A pattern began to form, right hand twitch, tilt of the head, open mouth, repeat. It was mechanical, programmed. Like something inside him was replacing what was real. I watched his face twitch the first time the lights flickered. Not like a reaction, like a signal had reached him. He sat up straighter. His back stiffened. His fingers relaxed. And then he turned his head, slowly, toward the open archway where she stood. She didn't say a word. She just stood there in that black robe, hands folded, chin slightly lifted. Her eyes weren't soft. They weren't harsh. They were hollow. And that made them worse. Dave rose without being told. He moved like his body was no longer his own. No hesitation. No confusion. Like something inside him had been waiting for this cue all along. The other guests formed a line behind him, silently. No instruction, no call. Just instinct. And one by one, they followed her down the hallway I had never been allowed to enter. I stayed back, not because I chose to, but because my legs wouldn't move. It was like standing inside a dream you couldn't wake from, watching the people you thought you knew walk into something too ancient to be named. I remember gripping the edge of the booth so hard my fingernails split, not from fear of what would happen to them, but because I finally understood. I had seen that look before. I had seen it once, years ago, in a video that was pulled offline within minutes of being posted. A comedian twitching on stage, eyes wide, mouth frozen mid-sentence. The lights had cut out. The feed had ended. The clip was buried. Until now, I thought it was just a seizure. But Dave was doing the exact same thing. Only this time, they weren't hiding it. They were walking him straight in. The hallway they led him through wasn't on the original floor plan. I know because I had studied it. There was no record of a lower chamber. No layout beyond the west wing. And yet, they disappeared behind that arch, and the door closed like it had always been part of the wall. I waited. Not because I wanted to follow them, but because my body had locked into place, and my mind refused to believe I was still awake. My ears started ringing, not sharp, low and constant, like a hum buried inside concrete. And under it, something faint, like distant water, dripping in a cave you've never seen. Eventually, the man with the blank tablet returned. He didn't speak, he didn't look at me. He simply nodded once, and the wall opened again. I stepped through before I realized I had moved. The air was warm, not just in temperature, but in presence, like walking into the breath of something too large to see. The hallway sloped downward. The lights were fewer now, dimmer, pulsing in rhythm with the sound of nothing. At the end of the corridor, I found the room. The floor was smooth stone, carved in patterns I couldn't understand. The walls were lined with people, the same guests, but quieter now, not blinking. In the center stood Dave. He just stood there, arms at his sides, eyes wide open. She stood across from him, just far enough that their shadows didn't touch. Her robe now shimmered faintly, though there was no light source above her. Her hands were still clasped, her voice still absent. But when she finally opened her mouth, it didn't make a sound. It was a movement. The flame of every candle in the room pulled inward toward her, just slightly, like they were bowing. The guests inhaled at once. A perfect single breath. Dave blinked for the first time in what felt like hours. Then she spoke. The words didn't translate in my head. I can't explain it. It wasn't another language. It was something older. Something that reached past understanding and went straight to the part of you that remembers fear from before you were born. And when she did, I saw him begin to shake. Not violently, just enough. His knees dipped, his shoulders slumped. Not like pain, more like loss. Like something was stepping out of him. His mouth opened. His head tilted back. His arms rose slowly, like they were being lifted by someone behind him. Then the lights dimmed again. But this time, they didn't pulse, they stilled. As if the room itself was holding its breath. And in that pause, I saw it. A shadow that didn't belong to anyone in the room. It moved along the wall, too tall, too long, not matching any body map. It circled Dave once, then vanished behind her. When she spoke again, he repeated the final word back to her. That's when I knew. He wasn't Dave anymore. He was something hollow wearing his voice. When it was over, no one moved. The room didn't erupt. There was no applause, no chants, no signal, just stillness. Like every person there had witnessed a sacred act and knew better than to speak it aloud. Dave stood completely still for a long time. His arms slowly lowered back to his sides. His chest rose once as if taking in a new breath. Not a gasp, not relief. Just a quiet, steady inhale, like his body had been reset. Then he opened his eyes. They weren't empty. That would have been easier to understand. They were alive, focused, but they didn't blink with the same rhythm. They scanned the room like he had forgotten us all and remembered something else. She smiled, just a faint, curved line across her lips. The kind of smile that says, it worked. And without a word, she turned and walked back through the hall she came from. The others began to follow her, calm, composed, like leaving a dinner party that ended right on time. Dave didn't move right away. He just stood there, blinking slowly, arms hanging loose now. Then, without looking at anyone, he walked back toward the main corridor. His feet moved with ease, but there was a slight delay in how his body followed. Like the movements belonged to a person still learning how to fit inside his skin. No one dared to speak, not even me. I stayed in the corner, half hidden behind a row of folded chairs. I watched the staff come in with towels and incense. They wiped the walls. They covered the stone markings with rugs that hadn't been there before. And within 10 minutes, the room looked like it had never held anything sacred at all. That was the most terrifying part. How fast they erased it. How practiced it all was. How none of them looked disturbed, only focused, like they were prepping for the next one. Back upstairs, the world had returned to its mask. Light jazz floated from the speakers. Wine glasses clinked gently. Some guests smiled as they exchanged compliments on the intensity of the evening. Others quietly left through the side gates, escorted by the same man with the blank tablet. Dave was seated again, this time at a different table, beside the fire pit. He was laughing. Small chuckles, his voice low, steady, unfazed. But something in his eyes was missing. Not a glow, not a sparkle. A weight. It's hard to explain unless you've known someone long enough to recognize the silence in their joy. He looked like a man trying to convince his body that it had always belonged to the room. And the room agreed. No one else seemed to notice. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. Either way, no one spoke of what had happened. No one referenced it, not even in whispers. Later that night, before I left, I saw a clipboard on the back counter near the service quarters. It was flipped open, and on the list were dozens of names. Some had check marks next to them. Others had circles. Dave's was not the first with a check, and based on how they cleaned the floors that night, he would not be the last. When I left that night, the sky was still black, but it didn't feel like night anymore. It felt like time had shifted, like I'd stepped out of something old and it had followed me. The driver said nothing. The car was the same, but the silence now carried weight. I kept looking at the rearview mirror, expecting him to glance at me. He never did. Not once. At the hotel, I didn't sleep. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, waiting for morning. But when morning came, it didn't bring clarity. It brought news. Dave was gone, just like that. A brief headline on one of the smaller sites. Comedian cancels upcoming shows, retreats from public eye. No explanation, no statement, just a disappearance. I kept refreshing the page, waiting for someone to say what I knew. But they didn't. No one asked questions. No one wondered why. A week later, a blurry photo showed him at an airport. Alone, no entourage, no smile. Just a hood pulled low and his eyes staring straight into the camera. Those eyes looked exactly like they did in that room. Dead, but awake. People speculated. Burnout, exhaustion. Some whispered about contracts, breakdowns, rehab. But none of them were close. I knew what had happened to him, but I didn't speak. I didn't speak when he returned months later, giving interviews that didn't sound like him. I didn't speak when he smiled with his mouth, but not with his eyes. I didn't speak when people joked about how different he seemed, because by then I had seen others. Not in the same room, not the same night, but in moments. You start to notice it, that look in their eyes, the stiffness in their voice, that pause between a question and an answer, like they're being fed something just off stage. It's in politics, in entertainers, in people who used to shine from the inside out and now glow with something artificial. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. I stopped working. I stopped talking. I disconnected everything because I couldn't trust what I was part of anymore. I don't know if they marked me that night. I don't know if I was meant to see what I saw or if I made a mistake by staying too long. All I know is this: it wasn't a one-time ritual. It was a system, and Dave wasn't the only name circled on that clipboard. I used to think the worst part was watching it happen, seeing a man unravel in real time, but it wasn't. The worst part came after the doors closed, after the lights came back on, after the headlines moved on, and the world started laughing again, but not with him, at him. They say the eyes are the window to the soul, but they never tell you what to do when the eyes are still there and the soul is gone. I started watching everything differently after that. Interviews, award shows, apologies, the way some people twitch just before speaking, the way they stutter when asked about moments they used to speak on freely. It's not always obvious, But if you've seen it up close, you can tell who's been hollowed. Some return louder, some quieter, but none of them return whole. And the people around them, they know, they always know. They speak carefully. They smile when it's time to smile. They never mention what happened, because in this world, survival depends on silence. And truth is just another thing they teach you to forget. I never went back to that place, but sometimes I dream of it. Not the room, not her voice, but the clipboard and the list, the names that hadn't been checked yet. And every time a new artist disappears for mental health, or a public figure vanishes after an outburst, I wonder if I already saw them once standing in the background that night, waiting their turn, smiling just a little too long. Because that's how it works. It's not fire, it's not blood, it's a process. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you listening. Stories like this aren't always easy to hear or to tell. But sometimes, sitting with the uncomfortable is the only way we begin to see what's been hiding in plain sight. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you ever noticed someone change like that, quietly, without explanation? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. And if this story stuck with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's more coming. Much more than they'd like. And somewhere right now, the next one is being prepared.